Welcome to Module 4, Tips and Tricks. So in these lessons, we're going to discuss the importance of following these basic, guidelines and rules for stand-up comedy. These things, if you don't do correctly, you just will not get the laughs you should be getting. And it can make a huge difference. I've seen performers just find those little tips and tricks and change their act a little bit, and their performance has gone from a 7 to a 9 out of 10. So it can make a huge difference just following these little tips and tricks. So see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about smiling. It seems very obvious, but surprisingly, a lot of comedians, particularly new and starting comedians, will come on stage and they'll be very stern-faced. Obviously, they're focusing on their act and trying to remember everything, and their mind's going 1,000 miles an hour. But it opens up the audience. They feel so much more approachable when you smile. So unless your character is pretty much a stern-faced, miserable person, really do smile a lot more. It makes a huge difference. You will actually get bigger laughs. People love to see people smiling. It's the window to the soul. No, it's not. That's the eyes. But you get the idea. It's an important thing, smiling. So smile a lot more. It just makes you more approachable and warm and more inviting to the audience to laugh at your jokes. In this lesson, we're going to talk about swearing and what's acceptable on stage and how much swearing is okay. My thoughts are, unless swearing is going to accentuate a punchline and it's absolutely necessary, I would avoid it, because an act that swears too much typically doesn't get booked for corporate work, certainly won't get booked for kids' shows, and a lot of the cruise ships insist on sometimes 2 clean sets that don't involve swearing. So it just makes sense to not be seen as someone that's a blue act or an act that swears too much. It's best to avoid it. And I think as well, and a lot of people would agree, I'm sure, that too much swearing comes across as nervous, really. You don't need to swear at the beginning of every sentence at the end as well. It's just unnecessary. Put it in as a little spice to your act, by all means, a nightclub act, not a children's show. Don't swear at children's shows, it's not acceptable. So yeah, I would avoid swearing unless it's absolutely essential. And it doesn't hurt a joke that sometimes you do swear in, that if you remove that swear word, the joke is often still funny. Perhaps not quite as funny, but if it means getting booked for gigs and more gigs, then it doesn't hurt to drop out a few swear words here and there. In this lesson, we're going to cover dress code, or how you appear on stage, what you wear. It's probably important to always dress up if possible. You don't unless your character is one of a street bum or a loser, then really why dress like one? You know, dress up a bit. You never see the biggest names in the world. Typically, they usually look smart, look professional, look like they're dressed for business. And I think it's important to always look like a winner rather than a loser, unless, of course, your character determines that you should dress like a loser. Hats is another thing. I particularly don't like to see hats on stage, unless, again, your act calls for a cowboy hat or something. Well, you know, that's it, then wear it. But if it doesn't, then why wear a hat? Because it does create shadows usually over your face. And if your face has got shadows over it, people aren't going to be able to see the facial expressions that you're using to sort of hammer home the punchlines and emphasise those jokes. So all in all, dress professionally, look smart, look like a winner, don't wear hats. That's my advice. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to deal with hecklers. So we've invited Chris Shin, our local expert MC and heckler dealer with person, to talk a bit about that. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, John. I've been doing comedy about 9 years, on and off. One of the regulars here at the Comedy Lounge, and I got a few tips on how to deal with hecklers and do some crowd work in general. So rule number 1, if you can avoid it in your first 5 minutes of stand-up comedy, avoid it. A lot of people learning to deal with hecklers isn't something that you learn overnight, but here's a few tips. So if you can avoid it, my go-to would be avoid it, but then sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's too obvious and you've got to talk to them and you've got to address some things here and there. So we're going to go through a few things. First off, let's go through for the reasons that you should interact. I interact always if there's something that's so obvious that's happening, like an elephant in the room, like someone breaks a glass that everyone hears, or someone walks to the very front. It's hard not to for the audience member not to notice it. So then I like to address it straight off the bat personally. When someone heckles you, says something disparaging or tries to get involved, heckle you, then I like to address it, stand up. I like to sometimes use it at the start of my bits to ask questions to the audience to get into a bit. Bit of a more advanced technique, but yeah, that's a way to do that. Another one to do is to disarm something that people have said, and here's a few ways that you can deal with that. So first thing I'd say is there's going to be a lot of hecklers in your time. Like I've been doing this 9 years. I've had thousands of heckles come at me over the years. It's always good to have a few up your sleeve ready. So like, I've got two ones for some bogans, some, old ladies complaining, I've already got a few set up in my sleeve ready to throw at them if someone says something to me. And in those moments, I don't have anything to say on the spot. I've always got a safety net to rely on where I can throw one of these out. Most comics will have this in their arsenal. And that mostly comes from time. The more you do it, the more responses you'll have. You'll say something funny one time, be like, oh, that's a good one. I can keep that in the bank for later. So next time a similar situation comes across, you've got something to throw at them. A lot of people address hecklers or talk to the audience if that they're talking amongst themselves. That's a big one. That's very distracting for us. If that happens around the front row or somewhere close to the front where it's very audible for either the audience and yourself, then I like to address that and gain control of the room. So you got to address it in a way of, a lot of people come at this very violent. They're like shut the fuck up, listen to me. I don't think that's the best way to do it. That is a way to do it, but to me it's not the best. I like to play on it in a playful way, like I love ya, but shut the fuck up. You know what I mean? So you got to do it with a little bit of jovial and a little bit more jovial, a little bit more fun, just to make it not so tense. You know what I mean? Another one that I like to do, is be playful. Also, when a crowd member says something to you, if it's a heckle, a lot of the time the other audience haven't heard this. So either repeat back what they've said if you're going to address it, or ask them to repeat it louder. And then a lot of the times they won't even repeat it louder, but sometimes they will, If they do repeat it louder, make sure everyone hears what they said and make sure what you say is concise and straight to the point and move on. Reasons not to indulge in hecklers is there's definitely some cons. If you get stumped while you're on stage, you look like an idiot. You've lost the control and the set will probably not go as well as you thought after that. Once you've lost the audience's trust, that's a big thing. So, a well-placed heckle can make you look like a fool. And so that's one of the big cons. You don't want someone in the audience coming up with a better joke than you when you're supposed to be the professional on stage. So you could definitely make you look bad. Pros, it can heighten your act. If you stop in the middle and address something and have a killer burn for someone that says something to you, that'll only enhance your act if you've done it right and if it's funny. That sometimes for people, a lot of times it's a highlight of the show for them. A lot of people do enjoy that. A little tip, some more tips is... So you want to engage with the audience a lot. So if you want to engage with the audience, do it to a singular person. Don't ask the whole room something. That's what I tend to do. If I'm getting into a bit, if I've got has anyone been to Exmouth before? I'll ask a specific person. Sometimes, have you been to Exmouth before? If I want to do crowd work to that person. So remember, be specific in the questions you ask as well. So if you're leading to a bit, don't leave open-ended answers. You want to be a yes or a no. So we don't want to be like, what's everyone's thoughts on COVID? That doesn't work. It's how do you feel about the lockdowns? But make it specific or make it a yes or no question. That way, you're going to get concise responses from the audience, and it will give you something to work about. A lot of the time, what will happen is if you ask an audience member a question after they've heckled, is a lot of the time that they won't say anything again. After that one heckle, they'll be like, they just won't speak. So that's also an opportunity for you to, make a quick joke on them and move on. The main reason we deal with hecklers is so we can continue our jokes though. We've got a finite amount of time on stage. We want to maximize that time for our jokes and the craft and what we've crafted, as opposed to dealing with people on stage. Some comedians obviously are different. I know some comedians that will only do crowd work, but once again, that's your choice. And take with that what you will. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. A little trick that I like to do for not coming off too harsh is you can say harsh things, but what I prefer to do is I like to imply harsh things. Like if someone's creepy and they heckle me out with something like, anti-women or something creepy like that, so I oftentimes will say, oh, all right, take it easy, Wolf Creek, as an example, right? What I'm doing there is I'm not saying they're a rapist, I'm implying they're a rapist. And if you want to come out with a lot of harsher comeback lines, that's a good way to do it. Never be as directly like you're a fuckhead. Imply they're a fuckhead somehow, That's a little bit funnier and takes the edge off the heckle a little bit. So it's not so, so know about. Another one, don't encourage hecklers. That's not, say that, but I encourage them all the time. So maybe take this bit out.
But certainly for new acts,
yeah,
you don't want to engage.
For new acts, I would not encourage heckles. Just stick to your time. Just try, get on, do your jokes. And a big rule is if you want to talk to the crowd, sometimes you can put the microphone to them so what they say goes to the crowd. But if you're going to do that, under no circumstances do you ever relinquish the microphone. Never physically let go of the microphone, because once I let go and John's taken it, he's got the control in that situation. You need to be able to yank it back if he says something out of line, or you need to be in control. And I think that touches on my last point, is control. A big reason why I do heckler responses and I nip hecklers in the bud so quick is because when I'm on that stage, I'm owning that stage. I'm owning that time. I'm letting the audience know I'm the one in control here. I've got the authority. You guys listen to me. And that's a big point that I'd like to emphasize. That's one of the main reasons that I deal with hecklers and talk to the crowd, is to establish that relationship with them.
One of the things that you do well is you don't come across nasty, but when you have to deal with a heckler, it is best, as you mentioned, to try and get your point across and get them to be quiet. But at the last resort, you really destroy them. Yeah.
The thing is, you don't want to chastise anyone on stage. That's not funny. No one wants to be like, mate, you're talking, you're interrupting the show, right? That's not funny. That's you're cutting character, you're breaking the show up just for that moment. That's something we want to avoid. So for me, I hate it when I see an act that chastises an audience. You never want to be like, hey, mate, you're talking, you're disrupting the show. That breaks up the show. That you divert from your character, whatever you're doing there on stage, and you address as through not your character. You break the character to address that if you're going to do it that way in a chastising sort of way. So I like to make a joke of it, incorporate that into an act, and then quickly move on to the next topic or quickly move on to my punchline. Another big one is for the very end. If you're just about to hit a punchline and someone heckles you, 9 times out of 10, if you're doing a punchline, you're close to your punchline and someone heckles you just before that punchline, 9 times out of 10, I would ignore that heckle and just do the punchline. It's not worth it to reset your whole joke for the final punch, because sometimes what will happen is if you interact at that stage just before your punch, then you've got to set your whole joke up again just to get to that punch, and then that wastes, another 5 minutes, or your whole flow will be off. So if you're towards the end of your joke, my general advice would be just just power on until your punchline, unless it's too obvious.
Yeah, unless you can't, in that case, just drop the joke. Sometimes you just have to completely forget that joke because they're just not gonna the joke's gone, hasn't it? Sometimes when
Yeah.
if the interruption's so sort of so obvious, you just you can't do it.
Just move on as
you-
quickly as possible.
And a lot of the times, the person on stage, they can hear this person heckling or talking, and the rest of the audience haven't even heard it. And as
Yeah.
like Chris mentioned, he can get a good laugh out of something, but don't engage it. Everyone else haven't heard. But if it's so obvious that it's got to be dealt with, then I think it needs to be dealt with.
Also, a lot of the time, if it's patrons just talking amongst themselves, if they're being quite loud, you'll also find that the other patrons around them will be annoyed at them already. So, if you can also gather the interests of everyone else around them to be annoyed at them as well, and be like, is it just me or is everyone pissed off at these motherfuckers? You know, and then that sometimes will get a cheer as well if it's that obvious. So that's another way you can engage them, is by engaging them with the support of everybody else already, as opposed to, you know, just shutting them down or whatnot. So if anyone's being too disruptive on from the crowd, as a last resort, if it's getting out of hand, oftentimes the venue manager or the venue owner will kick them out, and I'll go to John for that.
Yeah, that's it. We monitor the situation. We much prefer to not have to get a patron and kick them out. It disrupts the show. It really sets a bad energy. It's a horrible tone, especially if they leave and they don't want to go and they fight, they're arguing. And so we don't want to chuck them out, but at the last resort, we will chuck them out. And we just take that away from the comedian hasn't got to ask us. We would just make that call.
So in summary, the quick tips that I can do, like little shortcuts, would be definitely start building up a little arsenal of heckle comebacks. Try hit a few broad categories of, like, are they bogan? Do they seem like affluent rich? Are they like, you know, does somebody have a mullet? Whatever you want to do. Get a broad range of groups that can cover a few things, and build a few heckler comebacks in your arsenal. Have a few there to get ready. If you can avoid talking to the crowd, I would avoid it as much as possible, especially early on. It's something that it's a skill that usually comes later in a comic's career, as opposed to early on. But it's good to just build up a few arsenals, always be aware that it could happen, and just be ready for it as much as you can be. Yeah.
We're going to talk about when acts apologise on stage, particularly for a joke that they don't think perhaps got the laughs it should have done. And they're first to say, oh, you hated that, you didn't like that. And so often is the case that it's totally unnecessary to apologise. The audience have laughed. They've enjoyed the joke. They're waiting for the next one. They don't really need to be told that wasn't getting quite the laughs that it would normally get. Just move on. Why keep highlighting sort of negatives, I guess, in your act? And there's some really good experienced comedians that we see that still do that. And it's so, to be honest, it's annoying because they take the roof off and yet they're apologising for jokes. So don't apologise on stage unless it's absolutely necessary. Another trick as well, I think, or a tip is, especially for new acts, please don't jump up on stage for the first time or in your early times in your career and say, oh, I'm new to this, I've never done this before. Of course, they know that you're new to it because they're at an open mic night. So they're expecting that you haven't done it a lot before, but it just comes across as be honest, unprofessional. What you want is laughs, not sympathy. So don't play the sympathy card, all right? Just get laughs and don't look for sympathy. In this lesson, we're going to talk about bombing on stage or dying on stage. Either way, whatever you call it, it's a terrible experience. But every comedian, no matter what level they're at some stage, will bomb on stage. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So be prepared. It's awful. It really is. When people say dying on stage, when you do bomb or do die on stage, it feels like that. It feels like the end of the world, particularly when you're a new act and you've been on stage for a few times only and you think it's going great and you can't do no wrong. That's probably about the time when you're ready to bomb, and you will bomb. And my God, it's awful. I remember myself when I first went on stage, I've done all right for about 3 gigs, and I invited my wife, my brother, and family members, and a few friends along to watch how good I was. And that was the night I died terribly. It was awful. I changed all my jokes around. I got no laughs. It was just the worst feeling. In the audience was my wife, and she was like this. She was just shaking her head, holding like that. It was the most awful experience. No one even wants to talk to you after you've bombed on stage. They don't make any eye contact. There's no doubt that you've bombed. There's no doubt. It's just the worst feeling. But you do get over it. And it's fair to say you will learn so much more from bad experiences on stage than you ever will from doing good work. So when you bomb, realise, find out what you did wrong. What was your mistake? Was it the fact that you tried all new material for the first time? There must have been something that you've done. If you've done well up to then and that point, and then suddenly you just bomb, there's a reason. So usually it's something you've done. It's easy to blame others, but typically it's something you've done. It might be something's happened in the audience that there's been an awful event and everyone's not ready to laugh. That could happen, but more often than not, it's something you've done. And let's face it, you're just not good enough on that night. So don't worry, they don't hate you, they just hate your material. So don't take it too personally, and get over it, and get over it quick. Fear of bombing is one of the biggest things that stops people getting on stage. So once you've bombed a couple of times, it's actually quite liberating, and you realise that you can bounce back. You are funny. You know, all the funniness hasn't drained away from you for that forever. It's just that particular night's not your night. In an open mic situation, I'd advocate, if it's not going your way, just say thanks and good night and get off, okay? You'll get a round of applause just for trying, okay? It is acceptable to just do that on an open mic. You're not getting paid, you're not a professional, so it's acceptable. What's not acceptable is to make the audience suffer and labour on for the full 5 minutes, and everyone absolutely hates you by the end of it. So no, don't do that. Just thanks and good night and get off. If you're a professional and you're bombing, well, you better get funny quick, because it's unlikely you're going to get booked too many times if you're going to keep bombing. So big names, big stars do occasionally have bad nights. So does every comedian have bad nights, but they don't bomb. It's unlikely that these acts are ever going to bomb terribly. No one's going to, you won't have anyone sort of not laughing, but they just perhaps won't have the best night of their lives, but they just did okay. And sometimes in comedy, that's good enough. You're happy enough with a 6 out of 10. You've done the job, the audience has laughed a few times, and you get about your business. Of course, you always want 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. You always want to be the star of the night, but sometimes it's just not your night. And just get your thoughts together, look at what you could have done better next time, and get on with your life. Everyone bombs, as I mentioned, everyone bombs. So the best thing you can do is to get straight back into it, book a gig as quick as you possibly can, get back on stage and start those laughs coming in again, and you'll feel better straight away. I used to judge myself, and I think a lot of comedians probably still do, is you're only as good as your last gig. So if you're waiting 6 weeks to get an open mic spot and you bomb, you've got 6 weeks of misery torturing yourself to realise, have you really got it? Are you still going to be funny? It's not, of course you are. It's just everybody has these times, and it toughens you up, makes you a better comedian, and get over it, get it done with as quick as possible, and move on with your life and get straight back into it and be funnier next time. That's the best advice. In summary, anyone that starts out as a comedian or wants to be a comedian or does comedy is going to bomb, okay? Don't be too hard on yourself. Get straight back into it. Get funnier. Make the changes that you think may have been what made you didn't do well that night, and get on with it and just bounce back as fast as possible. That's the only cure, is get back and get laughs again, and you'll be fine straight away. It is the only cure to when you bomb, is get back on stage and get laughs. Otherwise, in actual fact, I do think though, some comedians, I've seen many a comedian that's been doing okay for a couple of times. They get on stage and they bomb, and you never see him again. I mean, that's not uncommon that people actually just give up. It's such a bad experience, but don't let that put you off. Everyone's going to bomb, so it's so important that you know that you are going to. Everyone's watching this going, some of you are watching it, I can guarantee you going, yeah, that's you. I've never bombed and I never will. It's coming, mate. Promise, it is coming. You are going to bomb at some stage. In this lesson, we're going to talk about pauses. There are times in a stand-up routine when it pays to pause and just let the audience get the joke. Gives them a chance to laugh. You don't really want to immediately tell a punchline and as they're laughing, go straight on to your next joke. They want to laugh, so let them laugh, let the joke settle in for them and let them start laughing. And as that laugh builds and it starts to taper away, then go into the next setup for the next joke. So basically, give the joke time to breathe. Don't tread on the punchline is another saying. So in summary, it doesn't hurt to give the joke time to breathe, let it go a second or two before starting on to your next setup. When a comedian is racing through and they don't give the audience time to laugh, basically, it comes across as nervous. It makes them look nervous and they appear nervous. So the audience feel a little stressed as well. They want to relax and see that you're relaxed on stage as a performer. You've got confidence in your material and you don't mind letting that joke breathe for a second or two so they get it and they can laugh and then you can move on. So don't come across rushed. Take the time to pause now and again. It does improve the amount of laughs you get and it makes you look more confident and more relaxed on stage and therefore you will get more and bigger laughs. A good bit of advice would be to record your performances and perhaps test with pausing and without pausing. And you work out for yourself whether it's adding to your act or whether it's improving your act. I think you'll find it will. I'll be very surprised if anyone finds it much better to rush through their performance. I'm sure pausing is going to add something and certainly get you more laughs. But you've got to see for yourself. So record your acts and compare. That's the best thing you can do. See you in the next lesson.